I'm Dan, but for the sake of this, let's just call me Mr. Sutherland. Today I have with me the local paper, or local-ish paper, of my town, the Chico News and Review, the CN&R. And I'm not someone who reads it very much. I've seen it in the past. I flipped through it on some of the headlines I thought were a bit more egregious, but I've never really felt the need to check it out. It's just not what I'm into. But there's one article on the front page of this one, let's see, Weekly, Volume 41, Issue 36, the 3rd of May, Thursday, 2018. And that is 25 ideas to reduce gun violence. Now, I want to make it clear now that I am someone who's always supported the Second Amendment. I've come from a family of ardent supporters of that and the Constitution as well. I've been hunting, I've been around guns since I was a kid. I love them. I think they're very interesting and they're an important thing of our society, especially as Americans, where we're kind of born of war in a way, if you know what I mean. We didn't just spring into being out of the benevolence of someone else's heart. We fought and took it. I just want to go over some of the stuff in this article that I think are naive, ineffective, and point out some things I think that are, we'll call inconsistent. And I want to make it clear, when I read this, I'm not trying to come personally after Mitch Riles, Daniel Walters, Samantha Hohlfield, I believe that's how you say that. I don't know. Wilson Criscione, another one I need to figure out again, and Quinn Welch. I don't want any of you to feel like I'm trying to attack you personally. It's more of the ideas, because I think that from what I've seen in many of these, dare I say almost all of them, they all set a bad precedent and they won't work for a number of reasons, which I will get into, but let's just get this show on the road, yeah? In 2010, the World Health Organization found that the United States gun homicide rates were more than 25 times higher than in any other high-income country. Well, from what I understand, that's not necessarily true, because, and I believe, I've done a dry run on this to make sure that my voice is ready for it, but I believe there's a part where suicide is at least mentioned, but homicide is still mentioned. They don't specify whether the homicide statistic for gun violence or gun crime is separate from all the gang violence and suicide attached to it, so we'll keep that in mind. And that was before Las Vegas, and before Parkland, Florida. We've witnessed 19 of the 30 deadliest mass shootings in modern U.S. history during the past decade. Well, deadly by what metric is what I want to know. Is it deadly by the metric of it's just gun violence? Because California itself has some of the best gun control laws in this nation, and they're still unable to stop these shootings. If you look at states like in the Midwest or even Texas, where the last time they had a mass shooting, the shooter was stopped by a man with an AR-15. It makes you wonder where you're going with this, basically. It isn't just about murders. The suicide rate has been skyrocketing as well, reaching a 30-year high in 2016. More than half were with firearms. Well, yeah, typically if for some reason you want to get something out of the way, you go with the fastest route. And especially when you want to kill something or kill yourself, as much as suicide is a terrible thing, you want to do it in the most humane and quick way possible. A gun's a great way of doing that. I'm not saying you should do it. I would hope you get help, but if you're gonna kill yourself, you're probably gonna kill yourself. There's no way you can stop it. Today, high school and middle school students have risen up in protests and marches after the Parkland shooting, demanding that something be done. But what? Well, in the case of kids like David Hogg, Emma Gonzalez, and I believe Cameron Kasky, they are all basically advocating for the abolition of semi-automatic rifles, or firearms in general, which at this point in time, semi-automatic firearms make up, I would guess, about 80% of firearms on the market. I'll put a link somewhere, hopefully confirming or denying this, but I just know that at this current point in time, semi-automatic firearms are universal everywhere. Any new handgun, new rifle, typically is going to be of a semi-automatic persuasion. And in turn, them suggesting to get rid of these would be infringing on Second Amendment rights. We looked at ideas to reduce gun violence, weighing the results of academic research and the analysis of experts. Here are the proposals likely to reduce gun violence and save lives. Plug the holes. Gaps in the federal background check system allow domestic abusers, convicted felons, and people with mental illness to purchase guns. Well, the domestic abuser thing, I agree. There's a problem that we need to address there. The convicted felon thing is technically patently false, because the background check system does work when it's implemented. And what I mean by that is that somebody has to be doing their job. We saw this in the case of the Sutherland spring shooter, the perpetrator of which was not legally allowed to own a firearm, but because somebody forgot to put this on their record, it didn't go through in the background check, so he was still able to get an AR-15. Now, if you want to say that we tell people to do their jobs better in that respect, I agree with you. But if you're going to sit here and tell me that convicted felons are allowed to get easy access to any firearm, I'm going to have to call bullshit. And call me crazy, but saying people with mental illness. That's a bit of an ambiguous term there. What constitutes mental illness? Because there's all kinds of different ways of saying that. There's extreme versions like schizophrenia or psychopathy and psychotic delusions. Or there's people who maybe for 6 months or a year had depression or anxiety and they needed to get medication, but that's on their record now that they had that. So by saying just mental illness, you're essentially opening the door to confiscating the weapons of law-abiding citizens who their only crime was they had to take a Xanax for a little bit. Roughly 20% of Americans purchase guns without a background check. Citation needed, please, because I know a lot of people who are Second Amendment supporters who, for their children or maybe a friend, they will actually give them a gun. Like, I know a lot of people in my family having given a rifle at a certain point. Me, myself, when I was in high school, my grandpa gave me a Ruger M77. It was my first rifle. He's owned it for decades, and it's mine now. It's not doing anybody any harm. It's just a simple bolt-action rifle for deer. A 2013 survey of prisoners locked up for gun violence found that more than 96% of offenders who were legally prohibited from owning guns had purchased them without a background check, probably from the black market. And we'll get into a minute more about why you're wrong in this next little paragraph. Experts point to 3 major holes. They're not experts. 1. In most states, gun buyers are able to purchase firearms from unlicensed dealers who aren't required to run a background check at all. After Missouri stopped requiring background checks for all firearm purposes, researchers found a 25% increase in firearm homicides. Now, I can't speak to the Missouri one a little bit. I'll try and put a link in the description somewhere that can verify that or not. But this thing about gun buyers being able to purchase from unlicensed dealers is false. Unless those unlicensed dealers are just, oh, I'm selling this to a friend of mine right now. Or, like I said, that thing before about passing it down to a family member. Because I know for a fact that every firearms dealer has to be licensed unless they're doing some illegal activity. Pretty much in every state there is, you have to be an FFL holder to actually legally sell firearms to people. And this thing about not requiring a background check in Missouri for a firearm led to a 25% increase in firearm homicides. I'm highly skeptical of this because when I hear that, no background check for a firearm purchase, I have to wonder if you're talking about lawful citizens who now have an easier way of getting guns, maybe to protect themselves for hunting or what have you, or if you're specifically talking about criminals, because again, criminals don't follow laws. Okay, number 2, if the FBI doesn't complete a background check in 3 business days, licensed dealers are free to sell the gun anyway. I want to say false on that, mostly because I know that FFLs have to jump through all kinds of hoops, because if they don't, they can go to jail just for screwing up. One little fuck up means they're done. So when you say this thing about dealers are free to sell the gun anyway, I have to call bullshit on this. And I would agree that we do need to change this boyfriend loophole thing. But I fear that in trying to fix the boyfriend loophole, it might be more limiting to the one in the relationship that's defenseless and suffering the abuse. Also, why is it called boyfriend loophole? Men can get abused too by women. All right, let's just skip to number 2 now. Let people sue gun makers again. No. This part of the article is saying basically that if a product has a lot of malfunctions, the best way to remedy that problem is to let people sue the hell out of the company, which isn't necessarily how it goes. In all the instances I've seen, when a company's had a problem with their product, they actually institute a recall to get it back and fix it and tell people, hey, we're sorry, we fucked up, we're gonna fix it. The same can be said for firearm companies, but it's not talking about that. Like it says here, a victim can still sue if a gun, for example, malfunctions and explodes. Yes, because that's a huge problem on the side of the manufacturer, because they were the ones that said this gun is safe and that you can actually use it. And it goes on to say, but not if a teenager uses it to kill 14 of his classmates. Well, the problem there is that how's a manufacturer supposed to predict that a teenager is going to pick up a gun and just kill a bunch of his own classmates? Do you sue Volkswagen if your VW Bug is sideswiped by a Mack truck? Because unless the car does something of itself that the manufacturer should have saw and they didn't put out a recall about it and it's happening en masse, then you might have a case here. But if you're going to say that we should sue Colt, Smith & Wesson, Springfield Armory for the transgressions of a select few assholes, I'm gonna have to say no. That's not right. We don't do that. Moving on, lift the research ban. This says lift the research ban, but it goes on to say later on, this March, Donald Trump signed a spending bill that left the Dickey Amendment in place, but clarifies that the CDC can research the causes of gun violence. And it says the Dickey Amendment prevents the CDC from spending money on activities that advocate or promote gun control. So it says one thing and it already confirms that other thing is happening anyway. Copy the Aussies. No. The problem that most people have with this idea that we should copy Australia is that we're not Australia. We have a very different history than Australia. Let's see what it actually says. Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton have both pointed to Australia as a model of how dramatic gun regulation can make a nation safer. Maybe in Australia, but that's not the case here. I'll come back to that in a minute. It's also about as close to taking your guns as the mainstream gun control movement gets. Yeah, here are the facts. Probably all lies. There were 13 mass shootings in 18 years before Australia's sweeping national firearms agreement in 1997. In the 20 years after, there has been one. While skeptics quibble with whether the law can be entirely credited, the country's already low firearm homicide rate fell further and suicides plunged. Flashy's piece of program featured a mandatory buyback program that gathered around 650,000 firearms, a full fifth of the country's arsenal. So what you're saying is that you're saying it's a mandatory buyback. That's a ban. That's infringing on my Second Amendment rights and millions of other Americans. No, we'll keep going. Instead, the key, as the Science Versus podcast explains, seemed to be the thicket of other laws that came with it, including a ban on semi-automatic and pump-action rifles and shotguns. So you're basically saying every gun that's currently being produced and on the market today. No. There's no one in the Second Amendment or general gun culture that's going to agree to this. This kind of thing right here will lead to a civil war. And I think you know that. You have to show a good reason to own a gun, and self-defense doesn't count. Why doesn't it count? Why is me wanting to protect my life and my livelihood not a good reason for me to own a gun? Why does somebody get to determine that for me? Let's do a scenario, just a hypothetical that I'm sure actually exists in Australia. Let's pretend I am not this face. Let's pretend I'm a petite young woman who just is afraid. I have an ex that makes me a little nervous and he seems unhinged, and I don't know if anything's gonna happen, but I would like to be able to defend myself if for some reason the occasion arises. Or what if I just live in kind of a bad neighborhood in Australia? What if I just want a shotgun to keep by my bedside just in case some crack-addled weirdo down the street decides I'm gonna break into that dude's house and I'm gonna take his shit? Why is it not my right to decide whether I can defend myself? Why is it that falls on a judge, a police officer, or whatever third party is involved that gets to determine whether I can exercise my right to self-preservation and defense? You can sell only through a licensed dealer. You have to register your gun and report if it's stolen. Well, that law already exists in a lot of states. I don't know how many, but a lot of them. California is a state like that. I believe if you don't report your gun as stolen or missing after 5 days, you can go to jail. Much of the Australia program would also certainly be struck down by the Supreme Court, and the cultural and physical geography of the United States would create serious regulatory challenges. But even some pieces of Australia's gun regulation program, when combined, could seriously reduce deaths. You're assuming that Australia doesn't have any problems of its own still. I know some people who actually live on the mainland of Australia, and they say they still have shootings. And not only that, but besides the fact that the crime rate was already basically decreasing before the gun ban and before the Port Arthur massacre, the gun ban that they instigated didn't change anything. If anything, I've heard conflicting reports that the murder rate actually stayed roughly the same level the year after the massacre as opposed to the year prior. And not only that, the gun buyback program, saying it gathered a full fifth of the country's arsenal, that tells me that there's still people who have guns. They're probably bad people. And I've heard that a third of those guns are actually buried or in the hands of criminals. So no, we are not going to copy Australia. Thank you very much. Number 5, track 'em. One of the most effective parts of Australia's strategy was simply creating a gun registry and then enforcing it. No, because that goes back to infringing on Second Amendment rights. It gives the government power to know this person has these guns, that person has these guns. If for some reason tomorrow after this is instigated, the government decides to suppress its own people and go door to door, it would know what to do, have more guns, and either kill a bunch of people or under threat of death, take guns from law-abiding citizens. And we as Americans don't like it when we're being watched for no reason. But we'll read on. The potential benefits are clear, particularly when combined with a requirement that lost or stolen guns are reported. Again, that's already a thing. It's a way to close the loophole of straw purchasers, where a person illegally buys a gun for somebody else ineligible to purchase one. I feel like that probably falls into the boyfriend loophole. It hands law enforcement officers the ability to actually identify which guns are stolen, cracking down on both illicit arms traders and allowing cops to get to convictions for thieves. And it encourages gun owners to do a better job of safely securing their weapons. Yeah, gun owners should be doing that anyway. without the threat of a cop or a military man saying, hey, we noticed you have a permit for a gun. Where is it? And this bit right here about a 2002 report from the ATF concluded that about 85% of criminal gun owners weren't the original purchaser of their gun because they were procured illegally. This next one, we'll get into it. Background checks and tracking ammo. Okay, this tracking ammo thing, it won't work. Mostly because there's already billions, maybe even trillions of rounds in circulation that are unaccounted for. And who's to say that some killer is actually going to go through the hoops of just buying a couple boxes of 223 for an AR and then shoot up a place? Unless for some reason you're going to advocate later on that we should actually be able to go door to door, take all the ammo that isn't registered, and then sell it back to people, which again, not going to end well, probably going to end in some kind of combat scenario, and treating the civilian populace that's legally owning firearms and exercising their rights responsibly as criminals. And the background checks thing, they're already a thing. Only a handful of states currently have laws regulating the purchase of ammunition. Those states are tyrannical. They need to stop it. Federal law does not currently require ammo purchasers to submit a background check. That's because ammo by itself is not dangerous. Unless you're hitting it with a hammer and throwing 9mm rounds into a bonfire, you're not really causing any harm with them. They are inert. They don't do anything. The only thing that makes a round dangerous is when it's actually put into the barrel and directed at something. I could have an entire house full of nothing but 44 Magnum. Unless there's a lightning strike or some kind of accident that causes a fire, those 44 Magnum rounds will do nothing. And starting in 2019, California will require ammo vendors to report bullet sales to the state's Department of Justice and conduct background checks on ammunition sales, which you're only hurting small businesses at that point. And if anybody's watching this and they're a gun rights enthusiast and are right there with me on this, you should buy as much ammo as you can before this law goes into effect. Probably use cash, might be safer that way. And let's see, while the NRA has opposed such proposals, a 2013 Fox News poll found 80% of respondents were in favor of ammunition background checks. They're probably asking Democrats, or they're asking Republicans who are turncoats, and you should not respect them at all because they don't care about your rights either. In a study in the journal Injury Prevention analyzing school shootings between 2013 and 2015 found that states with ammunition background checks, along with other factors, have lower rates of school shooting incidents. Far as I can tell, school shooting incidents are already on the decline. They don't happen as much as the media likes to tell. Also, the definition of mass shooter is a bit fuzzy to me, because I believe I've heard estimates as low as it requires 2 people to be shot, or as high as 6 people, which I'm not going to downplay their lives ending. That's horrible, but it's not really mass. Ban high-capacity magazines. Okay, this is another thing. We have to determine what is high capacity, because I look at certain things and I say that's a standard capacity. Say, in California, you can't own a magazine more than 10 rounds. I think that's bullshit, but there's certain guns that fall within this parameter. Most 1911s are fitted with a 7 or 8 round magazine. Revolvers can only hold 6 rounds if they're a proper cartridge like 38, 357, 44 Magnum, that kind of thing. But then you get to something like a Glock 19 or a Glock 17, where a 19 standard capacity is 15 rounds, and a Glock 17's standard is 17. Then you have AR-15s. The standard capacity for those is 30 rounds on average. There's some people who use 20 round magazines, but 30 rounds is about the average of a standard AR magazine. And not only that, but shootings like Parkland were committed with 10 round magazines. He did not have a 30 rounder. And this is assuming that criminals won't just go and find 30 round magazines somewhere else or get them illicitly off the black market. And there's also this part in here. It says, as advocates of high capacity magazine bans point out, you wouldn't need more than 10 rounds before reloading to kill a deer. Well, good thing the Second Amendment isn't for that. People like to say this whole thing about you wouldn't need that many rounds to kill a deer or for self-defense. Well, the thing is that while for killing a deer or any animal really, there are legal precedents that say you can't have more than X amount of rounds. And even then you have to use a very specific kind of round, because most laws have a thing about that for cruelty and humane purposes for hunting. But this thing about you don't need more than 10 rounds. When somebody tells me I don't need something, if it's something that seems kind of important in weird political times, yeah, no, that means I need something. And even if I didn't need it, why would it matter? Why can't I just want something and just go off that? Why can't I, as someone of sound mind, body, and soul, go out, buy a couple 30 round PMags, just to have in my safe and just to have around. They're not hurting anybody. I'm not going to turn into a psycho killer anytime soon, unless somebody tries to attack me or my family. So why should there be a ban on these so-called high-capacity magazines? And why does it matter if I need more than 10 rounds anyway, when it's no one else's business? Just like it's no one else's business who I fucked behind closed doors, it's nobody else's business what I load a handgun or a rifle with. Lock them up. This one talks about how we should basically keep weapons in safes, and there's definitely a good idea in keeping the majority of your firearms locked in a safe and maybe keeping one locked away a little bit easier to get a hold of for self-defense purposes. But this one talks about putting trigger locks on them that prevent the gun from being fired. Now let me run you through a scenario on that one, because if for some reason somebody breaks into my house, I have 20 seconds to react to, say, let's say I'm using a shotgun. I have to grab my shotgun out of the safe, which might take 5 seconds to get the code in and unlock. I have 2 seconds to grab the shotgun, but then we have to add another 4 to 10 seconds just to me unlocking it, making sure I can get that thing out of there really fast, then loading it, and by that point I might be dead. There is such a thing as being too careful. And this thing about gun rights advocates strenuously objecting and arguing that locking up their firearms made it nearly impossible to ward off a home invader, well, they're not wrong. If my gun is all locked up about 5 different ways from Sunday, I might not survive. Moreover, the people I'm in the house with might not survive. My loved ones, they might be screwed. And this thing, it says, but a 2015 Harvard University analysis found that victims using guns to ward off criminals were more likely to get injured than people who just tried to run away. Well, that's like saying people who got in their car to go to work in the morning were more likely to get in car accidents than they were if they were just stay at home and be a lazy asshole. Everybody likes to say you're more likely to be hurt if you use a gun. That's because guns are inherently dangerous. They're very useful, they're a good tool for self-defense, and we should respect them that way, but they are still dangerous. But even then, they're not more dangerous than, say, a car, which has far more moving parts. And this thing about trying to run away, sometimes you can't run away. Sometimes flight is not an option, you have to fight. I don't like it. I wish that wasn't the case, but that's the truth. Sometimes you have to fight for people. Let's see. By contrast, other studies have found that safe storage practices significantly reduce the risk of suicide and accidental gun deaths. You know what reduces the risk of suicide? Talking to people, telling them, hey, we're here for you, we'll support you, just please don't do anything you can't take back. And this thing about accidental gun deaths, one of the cornerstone rules of firearm ownership is if you have a gun and you don't know if it's loaded, treat it as if it's loaded and unload it. Even if you think it's unloaded, still treat it that way. That way no one gets hurt, especially yourself. Doctors and gun talk. Now there's this thing that says the AMA and the AAP recommend doctors discuss guns with their patients to prevent accidental shootings and suicides. Okay, I'm kind of for this so far. And the research on the effectiveness of doctors talking with patients about guns is limited and mixed, but it does seem to improve patients' use of safe storage devices, especially when doctors actually give out the devices. Okay, the only safe storage device you should have for your gun is a safe or a little vault that you can put it in. All right, this is the best safety device right here. What's in between your ears. Memorize the rules of gun safety and make sure that whoever else is in the house with them knows those rules. I was taught from a young age, don't point a gun at anything you're not intending to shoot. And anybody who puts a lock on the trigger guard of their gun, no, don't do that. That's not a good idea. Just because you'll probably lose the key somewhere and you'll be fucked to get that thing off. Ban bump stocks. Why does everybody go after bump stocks? This thing talks about how semi-automatic is just based on how fast you can pull the trigger, which they're right. And then it goes into basically using the recoil of the stock and simulating fully automatic fire. Well, okay. Anybody who has a bump stock and they aren't a mass shooter, they're probably owning it just for the sheer novelty of it. Anybody who uses a bump stock as a way to kill a huge number of people, they're not being tactically minded. Fully automatic fire is an exercise in fun, not practicality. The only time it's actually practical is if you're trying to suppress somebody else while somebody else with you is trying to reload or something. Also, this thing about, I believe it actually already has been banned. I think Trump signed the bill, so thanks, Mr. President. But it says here, after Las Vegas, banning bump stocks has become a rare measure even Republicans in Congress say they support. Those are bad Republicans. Okay, moving on. Number 11, raise the age. Check out this absurdity, it says. You can't buy a handgun from a licensed dealer if you're under 21. But if you're 18, you can still buy an AR-15. Yeah, I agree. You should be allowed to buy a pistol at 18 as well. Just like I think you should be allowed to smoke or drink or do anything to yourself at 18 because you're a legal adult and you're allowed to get killed in some fucking far off land for your country. And this thing about needing to be 21 to buy any gun. No. What's the point of that? And it says, while Republicans like Washington State's Republican Kathy McMorris Rogers argue that those old enough to join the Army should be able to privately own semi-automatic rifles. Yeah. What's the problem with that line of logic? Unless you're willing to raise the age of everything else up to 21 as well. Also, it says here, heck, raise it to 25. Treat guns as seriously as rental cars. No. I should not have to be 25 to exercise my right to self-preservation. Nor should anybody. And it says here, it talks about a Vox piece explaining gun violence, and I've seen Vox. They don't know what they're talking about. Don't listen to Vox. Respond to red flags. This one seems more like something that the FBI or local law enforcement should heed. Not me as a Second Amendment enthusiast. I know red flags when I see them. If somebody's talking about how they want to kill people, yeah, I jump on that and I say, you alright, man? Let's see, the horror of the Parkland shooting was compounded by the fact that so many people knew the shooter was a danger. Why didn't anyone take away his weapons? Well, because people brushed it off. You can blame the FBI for that. And Sheriff Broward. And I believe it technically wasn't even his weapon. It was a family member's who he had gotten it from. All the red flags in the world can't do much if the cops don't have a legal right to act on them. Well, kinda helps if your cops actually do shit too instead of waiting outside. So we're gonna move on from that one because, yeah, it's at a certain point, red flags, we as civilians can react to them, but if the FBI or another law enforcement agency knows what's going on and doesn't act on it, that's their failure. Not mine. Empower family members. The profile of mass shooters can vary radically, but a few things keep popping up. They're almost always men. I know it's sexist, we need more female mass shooters, guys. And they very often have a history of domestic violence. In fact, more than half the school shootings from 2009 to 2016 tallied by Every Town for Gun Safety, which is another organization that doesn't understand how things work. In fact, I can think of 2 ads they had where they showed a rifle firing the entire cartridge, not just the bullet, but the casing attached to it, along with someone loading a Glock magazine with the rounds facing backwards. So, excuse me while I don't really take Every Town very seriously. It's scary as hell to be a woman trapped in a violent relationship. It's even scarier if he can kill you with the click of a trigger. Well, thankfully, because that woman's a free American and they're a legal adult, they can buy a weapon to defend themselves and get out of the relationship. They can say, I'm dumping you. You come next to me again, I will end your fucking life. Seems like the system kind of works there. You know what scares people more than the cops? Dying. Let's see, alert the cops. Someone did. The cops need to do their jobs. Here's a policy both Florida Republican Senator Marco Rubio and his counterpart Democratic Senator Bill Nelson support. It requires federal officials to notify local authorities within 24 hours whenever someone tries to buy a gun that fails the National Instant Criminal Background Check System. If someone fails the national background check system, then it's working. Hopefully no one's been wrongfully convicted, or it's like the no-fly list where you get put on for no discernible reason. Yeah, so you're saying the national background check system works. Cool. Share records with the feds. The feds can focus on other things, thank you. Technically, federal law prohibits people with a history of some mental health conditions from possessing guns, which I talked about earlier, why I think is a bit of a gateway to more infringing on rights. But the FBI federal background check system relies on states voluntarily reporting that information and participation is spotty. Yeah, because most of these states just want to be left alone, and if you'll notice, a lot of the mass shootings happen in gun-free zones in these states that have the best gun control laws. It says here Pennsylvania entered over 700,000 mental records into the background check system, while Montana entered 4. Show me how many mass shootings happen in Montana, please. And it says here the vast majority of people with mental health conditions are, after all, not violent, so maybe stop bringing up mental illness. Focus on actions, not what's in here. Surrender their weapons. Yeah, if that's not the Democratic National Platform, I don't know what is. This legislative session, Washington State passed a first-of-its-kind law intended to prevent suicides. You can't always prevent suicides. If someone's going to kill themselves, they're going to kill themselves. And honestly, as much as I don't want them to do it, if they have to do it, I would rather they just eat the barrel of a Mossberg 500 and get it out of the way. No suffering, just bang, followed by instant peace for them. And it says, Citizens can now voluntarily waive their rights to own a gun by having their name added to a list of prohibited purchasers. What if they decide later on they want a gun, but then the cops say, no, you wanted to kill yourself a while back, and then they could say, that was 20 years ago. We've all gone through tough times. I don't trust that. See, making it harder to access guns can stop suicides. Not really, because Japan has probably the highest suicide rate of the first world, and they don't have any guns at all. In fact, it's written in the law. No one shall own a gun or guns, and no one shall own a sword or swords. About half of people who survived suicide attempts and were interviewed for studies said just a few minutes to half an hour passed between when they felt suicidal and when they attempted. Guns are more lethal than other suicide methods, leading to death more than 80% of the time. I'm sorry, but someone else killing themselves should not infringe my right. And maybe these people shouldn't have even have bought guns in the first place, or they could have given them to a friend or a family member who can hide it for them. But let's move on. Require a police interview. No. In New York, it generally takes about 6 months to get a gun after the applications, background check, safety training, and interview with a uniformed NYPD officer. So you're basically saying that New York is shitty when it comes to its gun laws because it restricts the law-abiding citizen for no other reason than maybe this will help something, which it doesn't. Fuck you very much. Moving on. Mandatory gun safety classes. I'm kind of in agreement with this one. If for some reason tomorrow we had gun safety courses in like middle school or high school or anything like that, I would actually be all for it, because that sounds like it would lead to a better understanding of how things work, and we'd have a huge cultural shift in this extreme hatred we have of guns. As someone who likes to go to the range every few weeks, it's just a great social activity. Manufacture and sell smart guns. So we're going to apply that problem where our iPhone crashes and we don't know how to fix it without taking it to Genius Bar and put it into something that can defend my life. No thank you. I would, and many other people would, rather that a gun is as mechanically simple as possible. No software mixed with my hardware. I pull the trigger, it goes bang, there's a safety button. If not, safety's here. That's all I need. Harness corporate power. This one is basically talking about raising restrictions on purchasing firearms, which I think is probably not the best legal precedent for a company. Dick's, Walmart, and Kroger are actually going to be losing more profits now because, at least in the case of Dick's, Springfield Armory has been cutting them off of their own products, and with this ban on the ARs for their other subsidiary store, Field and Stream, they're not going to get a lot of business anytime soon. Any NRA member I know of, or Second Amendment enthusiast in this regard, is going to look at Dick's and they would rather pitch a Molotov at it than give them money. And all these companies it brings up that are severing discount programs for NRA members are only screwing themselves more because they're going to be losing that revenue from them. We don't forget. Second Amendment enthusiasts don't forget these things. Ban assault-style weapons. Okay, what is an assault-style weapon? What is an assault weapon? What's an assault rifle? Assault rifle is not legally defined. If there was a legal definition for it, I mean, I would still say don't ban them because I'm an American with God-given human rights, and America is founded on we should be able to defend ourselves from a tyrannical government. And this thing about an assault weapon, which is a meaningless term. Weapon is not synonymous with a gun. Gun is a weapon, but if I go on a stabbing spree, like, is fairly common, more common than you would think, does that suddenly make my knife an assault knife? Are steak knives considered civilian knives, while K-bar knives the Marines use considered assault weapons? There's a lot of terror attacks committed with cars. Do we call them assault cars? And also it says, in 1994, the United States banned the manufacture and sale of certain semi-automatic weapons with military-style features and large-capacity magazines. And guess what? Columbine happened in the middle of this ban, so it was useless to prevent any death. In several of the highest casualty mass shootings in modern U.S. history, the shooters used semi-automatic weapons. Yeah, but then again, anybody who's driving a car nowadays is using gasoline. You can't say they're using semi-automatic weapons and then have that be your purview of what an assault weapon is, because if you were to say that every semi-automatic weapon is an assault weapon, then you're saying we should get rid of all weapons. I'm going to put up two pictures right now. This right here is an AR-15 from Colt. It is somewhat similar in appearance to the M16 or M4A1 that our military uses, but they are not the same weapon. This right here is a Ruger Mini 14. It fires the same round as this AR-15 right here, but it's built more off the Garand receiver that the M1 or the M1A had, from previous rifles. Below that is a Mini 14, but a tactical version. Now, what is the difference in these three rifles that makes them suddenly assault weapons, besides the fact that they're semi-automatic? Is it black furniture? Is it the round they fire? Because a .223 Remington round, which these all fire, and these are usually chambered in, aren't the most powerful round. As many people would like to point out, if they wanted to cause some serious damage, they might use something beefier, like a .308, a .357 Magnum, shotgun shells, stuff like that. And this thing that says a 2018 poll found that 67% of Americans support the ban returning is a flat out lie. If you're trying to tell me that 67% of Americans, probably also including Republicans or independent people, want to bring back this ban on assault weapons, you're bullshitting me, and I know it. That's Democrats right there, because more than half of Democrats want to outlaw all guns. And if you want to make the argument that, say, an assault weapon, or an assault rifle in this case, is any rifle that the United States military would use, why then should we have to ban it? After all, we are a country that was formed out of fighting off a tyrannical government, and the Second Amendment is a failsafe to make sure that we never have to deal with that again. And if we're going to go by the metric of assault weapon equals semi-automatic, then there's another problem, because that's infringing on Second Amendment rights even more, since that's basically what all guns being made are nowadays. True, there are bolt action and lever action, pump action, and shotguns and rifles, and there's single action only revolvers, but are you going to tell me that something like a Glock 17 like this here, or this CZ75 are suddenly assault weapons because they are semi-automatic and can hold more than 10 rounds, and they're not really for hunting? That is wrong. And this thing it says about assault weapon hinges on military style features such as a pistol grip or a folding stock. Why? Why do we even need a definition for assault weapon? That's a nebulous term that doesn't have to be defined. Because you can kill a bunch of people and assault them with anything. There's a trash can right in front of me. If I really wanted to kill some people with that, I could make it happen if I needed to. And there's a quote here. "We cannot clearly credit the ban with any of the nation's recent drop in gun violence," the authors wrote in the federal study. "Should it be renewed, the ban's effects on gun violence are likely to be small at best and perhaps too small for reliable measurement." And that's true. Like I said, in the middle of the 1994 to 2004 ban, we still had Columbine. And it says here the purpose of the ban in 1994 was to reduce the lethality of mass shootings, and that mass shootings have become much more lethal since the ban expired. Not really. There's no way you could kill people extra. And I've heard many sources say that school shootings and mass shootings in general are on the decline. Repeal right to carry laws. Fuck you. This one goes on to basically say that we should get rid of concealed carry because it's more likely to cause danger to ourselves. And this study from 1996 in Chicago, of all places, yeah, imagine that, said that almost 1,600 murders, almost 4,200 rapes, and more than 60,000 assaults. And it says here, in 2 decades since the authors made this study, academics have debunked their research. No, they haven't. And concluded that the right to carry laws actually lead to higher rates of violent crime. Can you show me where, please? I would like a source for that one, because I don't buy it, because contrary to popular belief, not all gun enthusiasts are Rambo. A lot of them are extremely law-abiding, especially concealed carry owners, because they have to abide by the law. They are legally meant to, because they have to go through so many hoops. Make buyers wait. That's already a thing. You just said in New York that you have to wait 6 months for this. So, no. And the thing about background checks or waiting periods is that you always have to tack on an extra couple days, because in California, it's technically a 10-day waiting period, whereas in other states, it might be 3. But the thing about California is that because no one's working Sundays or even Saturdays, I believe, that adds another day to your wait. So you're not really waiting 10 days, it's 11. And I would argue that waiting periods actually cause more death and more problems. I say we should just get rid of it entirely, but I know that's not a feasible option for everybody. It's a bit hard line, so I'll say we should have a 3-day waiting period. More counseling in schools. Yes. And we come to the final one. Name the shooters less. Agreed. And let's see. Sources? No sources. Let's see if there's something in here. Okay, about this story. A version of this article first appeared in the Inlander, a weekly based in Spokane, Washington. I really like how it just shows what I'm assuming is either an M16A2 or a Colt AR-15A2. Like, ooh, scary. Ending the carnage. Like, the problem with this whole article isn't that it's horribly misguided, which I say it is. I'm sorry those 5 people I name dropped earlier. I'm not trying to be insulting to you. I'm just telling you all of this is naive at most. Not only that, but this isn't something that's going to communicate well to probably any Republican who's not in office or any gun enthusiast like me. And a dramatic change in picture quality and audio because I am in the editing chair as I say this, and I realized I forgot to say this in the video when I was actually filming, but this whole article, besides the fact that it doesn't read as something that is meant to communicate towards conservatives or gun enthusiasts in general, and it comes across more as something that is already preordained and insulating to a certain mindset towards guns. So it's more for people of the Democratic persuasion, or maybe people who just don't know it all, and it's good to kind of fearmonger and tell them, hey, you are allowed to buy an AR-15 at 18, but you can't rent a car till 25, when really it doesn't matter. And I still maintain what I'm about to say after this bit right here, but I just wanted to say this right now, that this isn't an article for me. This is an article for somebody who's already decided that guns are evil. I'm seeing all of this right here as tyrannical. And you say this thing about copying the Australians. Well, they still have problems. Their murder rate was already decreasing, and then you got rid of guns. People still murdered people pretty much the same rate as the year before. I'm seeing all of this, and not only do I think it's not conducive to stopping more crime or ending mass shootings, I think, honestly, what we're looking at with this is more hoops to jump through, that with things like banning assault-style weapons, or repealing right-to-carry laws, or requiring a police interview, raising age. I think that all of these all sound like the doorway to more infringement and eventually dictatorial rule on us as American citizens. I don't want it to be that way. That's just how it comes across, and I'm sorry I have to say it. But all 5 of you, Mitch, Daniel, Samantha, Wilson, and Quinn, I think are in the wrong here. I don't think you're bad people. I think that you genuinely have good intentions at heart, but I think you are misguided in your ideas here. And I would like to hear from you. I would like you to hopefully see this video in good faith and respond to it. If not, oh well, I've kind of settled on the idea that that won't be the case. But if for some reason you do see this, and I'm going to make sure that on this, as well as this YouTube channel, I'm also going to put a link to it on the CN&R Facebook page, or maybe even link it on Twitter to them if they have one. And I'm going to put the word out. I would like to hear back from you on this. Please contact me. Leave a comment on this video. Tell me what you think. Tell me whether you think I'm wrong. Show me your sources. I'm all for this. With that, I am Mr. Sutherland. You have a great day.